The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council stood empty in the center where the human delegation used to sit. Ambassador Zixthar walked slowly past the vacant chairs, his three eyes focusing on the dust that had settled on the polished surface. 6 months had passed since that strange day when every human in the galaxy simply vanished. Nobody saw it coming. There were no angry speeches, no dramatic exits, no threats or ultimatums. One day the humans were there, working as they always did. The next morning, every human station was empty. Every human ship had disappeared from scanners. Every embassy was locked and silent. It happened so fast that some species still had human guests in their homes when the recall order came. Within 12 hours, not a single human remained outside their home system. Zixthar remembered the confusion in the council chambers that first day. Most ambassadors thought it was a technical glitch. Perhaps human communications had failed. Perhaps there was an emergency in their home system. Some of the more cynical members suggested it was a negotiating tactic. The humans were upset about the vote on the exploitation rights bill. Everyone knew that. They would come back once they made their point. But weeks passed, and the human borders remained sealed. Every delegation sent to make contact was met by automated defense platforms. The message was always the same, delivered in a cold mechanical voice that bore no trace of human warmth. Humanity was no longer available. Do not attempt further contact. That was all. The other species began to realize something was wrong when the first crisis hit. The Keltharian Empire and the Seth Dominion had been rivals for over 3 centuries. Their borders touched along a wide strip of space that both claimed. For 30 years, human peacekeepers had patrolled that border. Human diplomats had held countless meetings, working patiently to ease tensions. Every time violence threatened to break out, the humans were there with calm words and fair solutions. Without the humans, old hatreds surfaced quickly. Keltharian warships moved to the border. Seth battle groups took up defensive positions. Within 2 weeks of humanity's withdrawal, the first shots were fired. Within a month, both sides were at war. The Council tried to intervene. They voted to send their own peacekeeping force, but it fell apart almost immediately. The Vrelnian ships refused to take orders from Ort commanders. The Thalaxian military insisted on leading every operation. Arguments about tactics and command structure consumed more time than actual peacekeeping. The war continued to escalate. Then the trade routes began to collapse. For 30 years, human patrol fleets had protected the major shipping lanes. They hunted pirates with ruthless efficiency. They maintained thousands of navigation beacons across hazardous regions. They responded to distress calls from any species, at any time, asking nothing in return. The humans seemed to be everywhere, at once watching over galactic commerce like careful guardians. Without them, the pirates grew bold. Merchant ships started disappearing. At first, it was only a few vessels per week, then dozens. Insurance companies raised their rates so high that many traders simply stopped traveling certain routes. Entire sectors became no-go zones. Species that depended on interstellar trade found their economies crashing. Zixthar had spent 3 days reviewing reports of missing ships. The numbers made his head hurt. Over 2,000 vessels had been attacked or captured in just 5 months. The Council navies tried to respond, but they were designed for defending territory, not patrolling vast stretches of space. They were too slow, too scattered, and too focused on their own systems to effectively protect anyone else. The medical crisis was somehow even worse. Humans had the strangest obsession with studying other species' biology. For 3 decades, human research stations had welcomed scientists from every council species. They shared their findings freely. Human doctors developed treatments for diseases that had plagued other species for generations. They asked for nothing except samples and data to help their research. Now those research stations were empty. The human doctors were gone, and a plague was spreading through the Ort collective with no cure in sight. Millions were dying. The Gao Ort government sent desperate messages to the human border every day begging for help. The automated response never changed. Humanity was no longer available. Some council members argued that humanity had a moral obligation to help. They had developed the treatment protocols. They had the knowledge. How could they let millions die? But others pointed out the bitter irony. Where was the Council's moral obligation when they voted for the Exploitation Rights Bill? The humans had argued for weeks that it was wrong to strip developing species of their rights. They had presented evidence, made passionate speeches, and pleaded for compassion. The Council voted against them anyway. Zixthar had voted for that bill. He remembered feeling annoyed at the human delegation. They were always so concerned about every little species, every small injustice. They acted like the galaxy's moral police, constantly pushing their ideals on everyone else. It had been satisfying to outvote them for once. Now he was not so sure. A young Vrelnian analyst had approached him last week with a data file. She had been studying human activities during their 30 years in the Council. The numbers she showed him were staggering. The humans had mediated disputes between species almost daily. They had prevented wars that nobody else even knew were brewing. They had rescued people from disasters across the galaxy. They had provided medical care, technological assistance, and economic aid to dozens of developing worlds. The analyst had calculated that humanity did the work of 16 major civilizations combined. They received no special privileges for this. They asked for no payment. They simply did it because they believed it was right. Ambassador, the analyst, had said quietly, "I think we misunderstood what humans were. We thought they were just another council member, but they were more like the council's foundation. They held everything together, and we never noticed because it all worked so smoothly." Zixthar stood now in the empty chamber, looking at the reports piling up on his datapad. 17 wars had broken out in 6 months. Trade was down to barely 40% of what it had been. Medical crises raged on 4 worlds. Communications networks that humans had maintained were failing. Rescue operations that humans had run were now impossible. Even simple things like updating star charts and maintaining navigational databases were falling apart. The Council had called an emergency session for tomorrow. They would discuss what to do about the human situation. Some wanted to demand their return. Others wanted to apologize and rescind the Exploitation Rights Bill. A few suggested trying to manage without them, though nobody could explain how. Zixthar suspected it was already too late. Humanity had not withdrawn out of anger or spite. They had withdrawn because they understood something the Council refused to see. Without humans to hold everything together, the galaxy was tearing itself apart. And maybe that was a lesson the Council needed to learn. He walked out of the empty chamber, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Tomorrow would bring more debates, more arguments, more failed solutions. But for tonight, Zixthar could only stare at the reports and wonder how the galaxy had survived before humanity arrived, and whether it could survive now that they were gone. 3 months had passed since the emergency council session, and everything Ambassador Zixthar feared had come true. The Keltharian-Seth War had exploded into full-scale conflict that now involved 6 other species. The trade routes were dying, and the medical emergencies kept multiplying. Captain Relnvok of the Thalaxian Defense Force stood on the bridge of his warship, staring at the tactical display with growing frustration. His fleet had been assigned to patrol the Outer Rim trade route, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the galaxy. Before humanity left, pirates rarely dared to operate here. Human patrol groups had a reputation for being everywhere at once, responding to threats within minutes. Now, Relnvok understood why that had seemed almost magical. His fleet of 12 ships was supposed to cover the same territory that humans had patrolled with 30 vessels. The route stretched across 4 star systems and included hundreds of potential hiding spots. His ships were good at fighting battles, but this constant patrol work exhausted his crews. They were always arriving too late, finding empty space where pirate attacks had happened hours before. Last week, a convoy of Vrelnian medical transports had sent a distress call. Relnvok's fleet was 3 hours away at maximum speed. By the time they arrived, the pirates were long gone and 6 transport ships had been captured. Hundreds of medical personnel were now prisoners, and critical supplies meant for plague victims were scattered across space or stolen. Relnvok had filed a report explaining the situation. The response from Council Command was useless. They told him to patrol more efficiently. They suggested better coordination with nearby fleets. But there were no nearby fleets. Everyone was stretched too thin, trying to cover territories that humans had protected with ease. The captain looked at his navigation officer. How many distress calls did we respond to this month?
47, sir.
We arrived in time to help in only 9 cases. 47 calls in 1 month. Relnvok had accessed the old human patrol logs out of curiosity. In this same sector, human ships had responded to over 300 calls per month, with a 94% success rate. He did not understand how they had done it. Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld, Ambassador Zixthar was dealing with a different kind of catastrophe. The Ort Collective's plague had now spread to 3 neighboring species. The death toll had reached 12 million and was climbing daily. The Ort government had collapsed. Refugees were fleeing to any system that would take them, spreading the disease further. Zixthar had emergency meetings with medical experts from every council species. They were all trying to develop a cure, but none of them understood Ort biology as well as humans had. The human research stations had worked on Ort physiology for 20 years. They had mapped every gene, studied every protein, understood the species better than the Ort understood themselves. All that knowledge was locked away behind the human border now. The automated defense platforms refused every delegation. Some species had tried to force their way through, hoping to reach the human research stations and access the medical data. The human defensive systems destroyed those ships without warning. The message was clear. Humanity would not be forced. Dr. Yelena Korth, one of the few non-human scientists who had worked closely with human researchers, sat in Zixthar's office looking exhausted. She was a Vrelnian xenobiologist who had spent 5 years at a human medical station before the withdrawal. "We are trying to recreate their work," she explained, her voice heavy with defeat. "But the humans had something we lack. They had this ability to see patterns across different species. They could look at a disease affecting the Ort and remember similar problems they solved for the Thalaxians or the Keltharians. They connected information in ways we never thought to try." "Can you not access their published research?" Zixthar asked. "We have their published papers, yes. But those were just the final results. The real knowledge was in how they approached problems, how they thought about biology. I watched human doctors work for 5 years and I still do not fully understand their methods." Zixthar felt a chill. The Council had always assumed human knowledge could be replicated if needed. They had not realized that human thinking itself was the valuable resource. The communication networks were failing too. Humans had maintained over 4,000 relay stations throughout Council space. These stations did not just pass messages along. They filtered out interference, routed around system failures, and provided backup power during emergencies. Human technicians had visited each station regularly, performing maintenance and upgrades. Now those stations were running on automated systems that were never meant to operate without supervision. One by one, they were breaking down. Communication delays that used to be measured in seconds now took hours. Some remote systems were completely cut off. Emergency messages got lost in system errors. The galaxy was going deaf and mute. In the council chambers, arguments raged daily about what to do. Some species blamed others for the crisis. The Keltharians insisted the Seth had started the war. The Seth claimed they were only defending themselves. Trade disputes broke out over who should pay for increased security. Medical resources became sources of conflict as species hoarded treatments for themselves. Zixthar watched it all with a sinking feeling. He finally understood what humans had really done for 30 years. They had not just provided services. They had been the glue holding the Council together. When disputes arose, humans mediated with endless patience. When species refused to cooperate, humans did the work themselves rather than let it fail. When someone needed help, humans helped without asking whether it was profitable or convenient. The Council had mistaken human dedication for weakness. They thought humans were overly emotional, too concerned with ideals. Some had called them naive. Others found their constant moral arguments annoying. Now the galaxy was learning what happened when the idealists left. Without someone to believe in cooperation, everyone pursued their own interests. Without someone to insist on helping the weak, the strong preyed on them freely. Without someone to maintain the systems everyone relied on, those systems collapsed. A delegation had been sent to the human border last month. They carried an official apology and a proposal to rescind the exploitation rights bill. They broadcast their message and waited for 3 days at the border. Finally, a human voice responded. Not automated this time, but a real person. The message was brief. "Your apology is noted. The bill repeal is welcome, but humanity will not return to the Council. You must learn to survive without us. We cannot help those who will not help themselves, that was all. The delegation returned home with no hope of changing the human decision. Zixthar sat alone in his office late at night, reviewing casualty reports. The numbers were staggering. Millions dead from disease, hundreds of thousands killed in wars, thousands more lost to piracy and accidents that would have been prevented before. The galaxy was paying a terrible price for the Council's arrogance. His datapad chimed with an urgent message. He opened it and felt his blood turn cold. It was from the Council's Xenoarchaeology division. They had been analyzing the human databases left behind, looking for clues about why humanity withdrew. They found something. Hidden deep in restricted files were references to something called the Harvesters. The report included astronomical data, tracking calculations, and a terrifying prediction. According to human observations, a hostile alien species was approaching Council space, something humanity had encountered years ago and been monitoring ever since. The humans had calculated that with Council cooperation and human support, they might be able to defend against this threat when it arrived, but with the Council tearing itself apart, with resources wasted on pointless wars, with no coordination between species, the prognosis was clear. The Council would not survive. At the bottom of the report was a final human assessment, dated one day before the withdrawal. It was written by Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the Human Defense Forces. We cannot save a civilization that chooses self-destruction. We tried for 30 years, we failed. Humanity must now protect itself and leave the Council to face the consequences of its choices. Estimated time until Harvester arrival, 12 months. We will mourn for them, but we will not die with them. Zixthar read the date and did the math. The Harvesters would arrive in 3 months. The galaxy was out of time. The Council chamber had never been so crowded. Species that had not sent representatives in decades were now present, all of them bringing reports of fresh disasters. Ambassador Zixthar stood at the center podium, trying to maintain order as voices shouted over each other in dozens of languages. The previous Council speaker had resigned 2 weeks ago, unable to handle the mounting crises. Zixthar had been elected to replace him, though he suspected it was because nobody else wanted the job. Now he stood before the assembled species, knowing he had to tell them something that would cause panic. "Order," he called out, his voice amplified through the chamber. "We must have order." Slowly, reluctantly, the delegates quieted down. Zixthar looked at his notes, then decided to abandon them. The formal speech he had prepared seemed pointless now. 3 months ago, humanity withdrew from the Council, he began. We all know this. What most of you do not know is why they left, or what they were protecting us from. He activated the main display, showing the data the xenoarchaeology team had uncovered. Images of the Harvesters appeared, reconstructed from human observations. They looked like nothing the Council species had ever seen. Biomechanical ships more like living creatures than vessels with weapons that seemed to grow from their hulls. These are the Harvesters, Zixthar continued. Humanity encountered them 35 years ago, during their expansion phase before joining the Council. The humans fought a brief engagement and barely escaped. They have been monitoring the Harvesters' progress ever since. The chamber erupted in questions. How many ships? What weapons? Where were they now? Zixthar held up a hand for silence. According to human calculations, the Harvesters will reach Council space in approximately 60 days. They are a predatory species that consumes other civilizations. They take technology, resources, and biological material. They leave nothing behind. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Zixthar saw fear on every face in every variation of expression across the different species present. Why did humans not warn us? Someone called out. They tried, Zixthar replied quietly. For 30 years, humanity prepared defenses while maintaining peace in Council space. They shared military technology. They trained our forces in combat tactics. They built defensive networks and early warning systems. All of this was preparation for the Harvesters. He paused, letting that sink in. But preparation required unity. It required species working together, sharing resources, maintaining strong infrastructure. Instead, we passed bills that promoted exploitation. We started wars over old grudges. We ignored human warnings about cooperation. When humanity calculated the odds of our survival, they realized we would not make it, so they withdrew to protect themselves, leaving us to face what we had made ourselves too weak to fight. A Keltharian delegate stood up angrily. You are saying this is our fault?
Humanity abandoned us.
Humanity tried to save us for 3 decades. Zixthar shot back. We refused to be saved. We thought we knew better. We thought their concerns about unity and cooperation were naive idealism. Now we are about to discover why they were right. Dr. Korth, the Vrelnian scientist, stepped forward with a data tablet. She had been working non-stop since the Harvester revelation, analyzing everything the humans had left behind. I have been studying human contributions to the Council, she said, her voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. The numbers are important for understanding what we have lost. She projected data onto the main screen. Over 30 years, humanity mediated 847 disputes between species. Most of these would have escalated to armed conflict. They prevented 23 major wars before they could start. Their military forces responded to over 100,000 distress calls with a 94% success rate. The numbers kept coming, each one more staggering than the last. Human xenobiologists had developed treatments for 312 previously incurable diseases. Human engineers had maintained the infrastructure for the entire galactic communication network. Human patrol fleets had rescued over 2 million beings from disasters. Human economic aid programs had uplifted 47 developing species. The total value of human contributions, Dr. Korth concluded, is equivalent to the combined output of 16 major civilizations. They did all of this while asking nothing in return except fair treatment for developing species. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had voted for the Exploitation Rights Bill. Humanity was not just another council member. They were the foundation that everything else was built on, and we voted to destroy that foundation because we wanted to exploit the weak. Now the foundation is gone and everything is collapsing. Zixthar let the silence stretch. He wanted every delegate to fully understand what they had done. Finally, a young Ort representative spoke up. Her voice was hoarse from grief. Millions of her species had died in the plague. What can we do? How do we fight the Harvesters? Alone? We cannot, Zixthar admitted. Our military forces are scattered across a dozen active wars. Our industrial capacity is crippled by the trade collapse. Our communication systems are failing. We have 60 days to prepare for an enemy that humanity, with all their capabilities, barely escaped from. Then we must ask humanity to return, an elder Seth delegate said. We must beg if necessary. We already tried, Zixthar replied. They refused. But perhaps we have not tried hard enough. Perhaps we need to show them we have truly changed. Over the next 3 days, the council worked with frantic energy. First, they voted unanimously to repeal the Exploitation Rights Bill. Then they went further. They passed laws protecting developing species. Laws that humanity had proposed years ago and the Council had rejected. They established reparation funds for every species that had been exploited. They created treaties forcing cooperation between former enemies. It was everything humanity had wanted. But it came too late, driven by fear rather than genuine change of heart. Still, it was something. Zixthar personally led a delegation to the human border. He chose delegates carefully, picking those who had opposed humanity most strongly. If humans saw their greatest critics admitting they were wrong, perhaps it would mean something. At the border, they broadcast their message. They explained everything the Council had done. They showed evidence of the new laws, the reparations, the peace treaties. They admitted their mistakes openly and without excuse. Then they waited. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, after 3 hours, a response came. Not automated this time, but a human voice. Female, tired, but very much alive. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. Your message has been received and reviewed. Zixthar felt hope surge in his chest. Admiral, your apology is acknowledged, Chen interrupted. The legal reforms are welcome and long overdue. We are genuinely pleased to see the Council taking these steps. Then you will help us? Zixthar asked. There was a long pause. When Chen spoke again, her voice carried deep sadness. Ambassador, do you know why humanity came to Council space 30 years ago? You were exploring, seeking contact with other species. We were running, Chen said bluntly. We encountered the Harvesters near our home system. We barely escaped with our lives. We found the Council and saw species who had no idea what was coming. We joined the Council hoping to build a coalition strong enough to stand against the Harvesters when they arrived. Then help us do that now. We tried for 30 years, Chen replied. We gave everything we had. We worked ourselves to exhaustion maintaining your peace, your infrastructure, your safety. We did it willingly because we believed in the idea of the Council. We thought if we just showed you what cooperation could achieve, you would embrace it." Her voice hardened. "Instead, you took everything we offered and decided it meant you could exploit those weaker than yourselves. You started wars over pride. You let species die because saving them was inconvenient. You proved that you did not want a council of equals. You wanted an empire of exploitation with human labor making it all function. We were wrong," Zixthar said desperately. "We see that now. We are trying to change." "You are trying to survive," Chen corrected. "There is a difference. You changed because you are afraid, not because you believe it is right. An ambassador, humanity will not sacrifice itself for a civilization that only values justice when faced with extinction." "So you will let us die?" an Ort delegate cried out. "After all the speeches about protecting the weak?" "We will mourn for you," Chen said quietly. "Every human who served in the council, who worked to build something better, will grieve for what you could have been. But we will not die alongside you. We tried to save you for 30 years. You chose a different path. Now you must walk it to the end. The harvesters will come for you eventually," a Keltharian delegate pointed out. "You cannot hide forever." "Perhaps," Chen admitted. "But we will face them on our terms in our own time with our resources intact, not worn down trying to save people who refuse to save themselves. I am sorry, Ambassador, truly, but humanity is going home. Defend yourselves." The connection cut off. The delegation sat in their ships staring at the human border defenses that would not let them pass. Zixthar looked at the calendar. 57 days until the harvesters arrived. The harvesters emerged from hyperspace exactly when human calculations had predicted. Captain Relnivok watched them appear on his sensors and felt his blood turn cold. There were so many, thousands upon thousands of biomechanical ships that moved like living things, flowing through space in coordinated patterns that seemed almost beautiful until you remembered they were here to kill everything. "All Council forces, this is Fleet Command." A Vrelnian voice came through communications. "Maintain formation. Wait for them to enter weapons range. Stay coordinated." Relnivok could hear the fear beneath the professional tone. They all knew how this would end. But they would try anyway. It was all they could do. The harvesters did not slow down or attempt communication. They simply came on like a wave of living metal, their weapons beginning to charge with sickly green light. "Contact in 60 seconds, Relnivok's tactical officer reported. "All weapons ready." The captain opened a ship-wide channel. "Crew of the Steadfast, we know the odds. We know we probably will not survive this. But we fight anyway, because others depend on us. Make every shot count. Make the enemy remember that Council species do not die easily." His crew responded with grim determination. All across the Council fleet similar speeches were being given. Species that had fought each other for centuries now stood together against the darkness. The first shots were fired. Council energy weapons lanced out, striking harvester vessels. Some of the alien ships shuddered under the impact. A few even exploded, torn apart by concentrated fire. For a moment, hope flickered. Then the harvesters returned fire. Green energy beams cut through Council ships like they were made of paper. Shields that should have held for minutes collapsed in seconds. Armor designed to withstand nuclear blasts melted under the alien weapons. Ships exploded or went dead, drifting in space with their crews dead or dying inside. The Council formation began to break apart as ships tried to evade the devastating fire. Relnivok's vessel shook as a near miss scorched their port side. "Shields at 40%, his engineer screamed. "We cannot take another hit like that. All ships, maintain formation," the Fleet Command voice ordered, now openly desperate. "If we scatter, we are lost." But fear was stronger than discipline. Ship after ship broke away, trying to flee or seeking better positions. The coordinated defense collapsed into chaos exactly as the harvesters had expected. The alien vessels adapted their tactics instantly, targeting the ships that broke formation first. It was a slaughter. Zixthar watched from the command center, seeing his worst fears realized. In less than 10 minutes, the Council had lost over 3,000 ships. The harvesters had lost barely 200. At this rate, the entire defense force would be gone within the hour. "Send the retreat order," he said quietly. "Tell them to fall back to secondary positions. Try to regroup." The communications officer looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "Sir, we are receiving multiple distress calls. Hundreds of ships are crippled and calling for rescue." "There is no one to rescue them," Zixthar replied, his voice breaking. "Save who we can. Retreat." Then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open behind the Council worlds. Not the normal shimmer of hyperspace, but great rifts that blazed with light. And through those rifts came ships. Human ships. Thousands of them. Designs the Council had never seen before. Massive warships bristling with weapons. Sleek carriers launching wave after wave of fighters. And at the center, a fortress ship so large it dwarfed everything around it. A human voice thundered across every communication channel, strong and clear and absolutely fearless. "Galactic Council forces, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. Fall back to secondary positions immediately. We will take it from here." Relmvok stared at his sensors in disbelief. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, forming battle lines between the Council forces and the Harvesters. Within seconds, human weapons opened fire. The difference was stunning. Where Council weapons had barely damaged Harvester vessels, human weapons tore through them, missiles that adapted mid-flight to target weak points, energy beams that seemed to ignore Harvester shields, kinetic rounds that punched through armor like it was nothing. The Harvesters, encountering real resistance for perhaps the first time in centuries, hesitated. Then they adapted, their ships shifting formation and their weapons adjusting. They concentrated fire on the human fleet with the full fury they had held in reserve. Human ships began to die. But unlike the Council forces, humans did not break formation. When one ship fell, others moved to fill the gap. When the Harvesters tried to flank, human fighters intercepted them. The battle became a brutal close-quarter struggle between two forces that actually knew how to fight. For 18 hours, the battle raged. Relmvok's crippled vessel limped away from the combat zone, his crew working frantically to restore systems. Through the sensors, he watched human ships sacrifice themselves to protect Council worlds. He saw a human destroyer deliberately ram a Harvester capital ship to stop it from firing on a helpless Ort colony. He watched human fighter pilots engage in suicide runs to take out Harvester weapon platforms. They were dying for species that had rejected them, for a Council that had ignored their warnings and dismissed their sacrifice, and they were doing it without hesitation. Finally, impossibly, the Harvesters began to retreat. Damaged and depleted, the alien fleet pulled back, regrouping in deep space. The human fleet held position, bloodied but unbroken. Admiral Chen's face appeared on every screen, her uniform scorched and her face showing exhaustion, but her eyes were steady. "The Harvesters will regroup and return," she said without preamble. "You have maybe 5 years, perhaps 10. Use that time wisely. Build real defenses. Learn to work together. Train your forces properly, because next time we may not be able to stop them." Zixthar found his voice, though it shook with emotion. "Admiral, why? After everything we did, after we rejected you, why did you come back?" Chen was silent for a long moment, and something like sadness crossed her face. 30 years ago, humanity arrived at Council space as refugees. We were running from nightmares, desperate and afraid. You gave us shelter. You welcomed us as members. You gave us hope that the galaxy held more than darkness and terror." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When the Council failed to live up to what we thought it was, we were angry, hurt. We felt betrayed, so we left thinking we could just protect ourselves and let you face the consequences of your choices. But then the moment came," Chen continued, "when we had to decide whether to act based on anger or based on who we want to be. And we realized something. We are not the kind of species that lets billions die because we are disappointed in them. We are not the kind of people who abandon others to face horror alone, even when they would have abandoned us." Her voice grew firmer. "You failed to be what we hoped you would be. But that does not give us permission to fail to be who we are. Humanity protects the weak. We stand against evil. We help those in need. Not because we expect gratitude, but because it is right. That does not change just because you made bad choices." The transmission ended. Human ships began rescue operations, pulling survivors from crippled council vessels without hesitation. Medical frigates moved to aid stations, treating wounded from any species. Engineering crews helped repair damaged infrastructure. Realmvok watched a human rescue ship carefully extract survivors from a Seth destroyer that was leaking atmosphere. The humans worked with the same dedication they had always shown, as if nothing had changed. As if the council had not rejected them and driven them away. In the command center, Dr. Korth approached Zixthar with tears in her eyes. I received a message from Dr. Martinez. She said that humanity had a debate for weeks about whether to intervene. The vote was very close. Many humans wanted to let us face this alone. What changed their minds? Zixthar asked. Admiral Chen gave a speech to their government. She said that if humanity abandons its values just because others fail to share them, then humanity loses what makes it special. She said that being good only when it is convenient is not being good at all. Real morality means doing the right thing, especially when it is hard, when it costs you, when you get nothing in return. Dr. Korth handed him a datapad. The humans are not returning to the council. They made that clear. But they are offering a new arrangement, a mutual defense pact, a partnership between equals rather than a membership in a failing institution. Zixthar read the proposal. It was generous, far more generous than the council deserved, but it came with conditions. The council had to maintain the reforms they had passed. They had to prove they could work together. They had to contribute to their own defense rather than depending on human protection. In other words, humanity would help them, but the council had to help themselves first. Over the following weeks, the council began the hard work of actually changing. Not because destruction was imminent, but because they had been shown what they could be. Species that had fought for centuries began difficult peace negotiations. Resources that had been hoarded were shared. The weak were protected rather than exploited. It was slow. There were setbacks and failures. Old habits died hard. But humans were there, not doing the work for them, but offering guidance when asked. 40 days remained until the harvesters arrived. The council chamber buzzed with desperate activity, as military commanders from every species tried to organize a coordinated defense. It was going badly. General Xanthor of the Vrelnian forces stood at a tactical display pointing at a star map. We should concentrate all forces at the outer rim, make our stand there far from populated systems. Foolish, snapped Commander Velshen of the Thalaxian fleet. The harvesters will simply go around us. We must guard each homeworld individually. Then we will be defeated in detail, Xanthor argued. Divided forces cannot stand against a unified enemy. You only want central command because you think Vrelnians should lead, Velshen accused. The argument spiraled from there. Zixthar watched from his seat, feeling helpless. Every planning session ended like this. Ancient rivalries and wounded pride mattered more than survival. The council could not even agree on a basic defensive strategy, let alone execute one. Meanwhile, Dr. Korth worked in a research facility, leading a team trying to understand the harvesters. They had limited information from human databases, images from long-range scans, analysis of weapon signatures from that brief battle 30 years ago, reports from human scouts who had tracked the harvesters' slow journey across space. It was not enough. The humans had spent decades studying this enemy. They understood harvester tactics, weaknesses, ship design, but they had locked away the detailed analysis behind their borders. The fragments left behind were barely useful. Their ships are partially biological, Dr. Korth explained to the military commanders during one briefing. They adapt quickly to weapons. The humans noted that conventional energy weapons became less effective after repeated use. The harvesters' armor evolved to resist them. What weapons did work? A commander asked. The human reports do not say specifically. They reference alternative approaches and adaptive countermeasures, but the details are classified or deleted. Useless, muttered a Keltharian officer. They might as well have left us nothing. Dr. Korth bit back an angry response. The humans had left them plenty. Instructions for building better shields, guidance on fleet coordination, suggestions for evacuation procedures, but the council forces were too disorganized to implement any of it properly. She returned to her lab late at night, exhausted and frightened. A message was waiting on her private terminal. It took her a moment to recognize the sender code. Then her breath caught. It was from Dr. Martinez, her human colleague and friend from the research station. "Elena," the message began, using her personal name instead of her formal designation. "I am breaking regulations by sending this. But I cannot let you face what is coming without help." The message included several data files, medical protocols for treating harvester weapons injuries, analysis of their ship weak points. Most importantly, tactical assessments of their attack patterns. "The key is not fighting harder," Dr. Martinez wrote. "It is fighting smarter. Harvesters expect prey species to panic and scatter. They have encountered hundreds of species across millennia, and all of them responded the same way. Fear makes you predictable. If you can coordinate despite terror, if you can adapt faster than they expect, you might survive long enough to hurt them, maybe long enough for help to arrive." The message ended there. Dr. Korth read it 3 times, then checked the file timestamps. This information had been sent 5 minutes ago, which meant Dr. Martinez had waited until now, until the very last moment, to break human regulations and help her. It meant some humans still cared. That thought made her cry for the first time since the crisis began. She immediately sent the data to military command. Some commanders dismissed it. Human tricks and human lies, they said, but a few listened. Xanthor in particular studied the tactical assessments carefully. "This changes things," he said slowly. "If this analysis is accurate, we have been preparing incorrectly." He called for a new strategy meeting, sharing what Dr. Martinez had sent. Slowly, reluctantly, other commanders began to see the pattern. The harvesters had specific approach vectors they preferred. They targeted communication hubs first to create chaos. They expected defenders to either flee or fight with emotional desperation. "We must appear weak," Xanthor concluded, "but be strong. Draw them into traps. Make them think we are easy prey, then hit them where it hurts." It was a good plan. Perhaps it would even work. But as military officers began implementing it, Zixthar received reports that made him understand how deeply the Council's problems ran. 3 species refused to participate in the coordinated defense. They were building their own defenses around their homeworlds, convinced that everyone else would betray them. 2 major fleets were still engaged in active warfare against each other, refusing to declare a ceasefire despite the approaching threat. And the industrial facilities needed to build new weapons were crippled by the economic collapse. Zixthar wanted to scream at them all. Could they not see that divisions meant death? But he understood now that the Council's problems went deeper than laws or policies. The species fundamentally did not trust each other. Without humans forcing cooperation through their endless diplomatic work, old fears and hatreds consumed everything. The one bright spot was the Ort Collective. Having lost millions to plague and abandonment, they threw themselves completely into preparation. Ort engineers worked around the clock building shield generators. Ort volunteers trained as fighter pilots. Young Ort, who had never considered military service, signed up in massive numbers. When asked why, an Ort pilot explained simply, "Humanity tried to save us, and we ignored them. If we die now, we die knowing we were wrong. But maybe we can show them we learned something. Maybe next time someone will listen sooner." 20 days before the harvesters' arrival, long-range sensors finally detected them. The images sent chills through every Council species. There were thousands of ships, moving in coordinated groups like schools of predatory fish. They were not slowing down. They were not broadcasting any messages. They simply came on unstoppable and silent. The Council forces moved into position. 57 different fleets representing every Council species. Nearly 80,000 ships in total. It should have been an impressive force. But Zixthar, watching from the command center, saw the gaps in the formation. The ships that maintained too much distance from potential enemies. The fleets that positioned themselves to flee rather than fight. They were not an army. They were a mob, held together by terror rather than trust. On Earth, in the Human Military Command Center buried deep beneath Geneva, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the same sensor displays. Around her, human officers monitored the situation with grim faces. "The harvesters will reach Council space in 20 days, her tactical officer reported. "Council forces are moving to intercept." "Strength assessment?" Chen asked quietly. "They will be destroyed. Maybe they take down 10% of the harvester fleet if they are lucky and coordinated. More likely 5%. The harvesters will be damaged but fully capable of proceeding to human space afterward. Chen nodded slowly. She had known this would happen. The math was clear. The council was too weak, too divided, too broken by their own choices. They would die, and then the harvesters would come for humanity. Unless. Begin final preparations, she ordered. Recall all deep space assets. Activate the reserve fleets. Contact every colony, and tell them to prepare for possible invasion. Her officers moved to obey. One young lieutenant hesitated. Admiral, are we mobilizing to defend ourselves or just follow orders, Lieutenant? But Chen knew what he was asking. Was humanity preparing to defend Earth after the council fell, or was humanity preparing to intervene despite everything? She had sworn to her government that humanity would not sacrifice itself for the council. She had meant it when she told Zixthar that the council had to face the consequences of their choices. Every strategic analysis said intervention was foolish. The council had proven they could not be saved. But Chen remembered something her grandfather had told her long ago. He had been a soldier too, had fought in Earth's final wars before humanity reached the stars. Sarah, he had said, sometimes the right thing to do is strategically stupid. When that happens, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Chen looked at the display showing the council's pathetic fleet arrangement. She thought about all the human personnel who had served in council space, the doctors who had treated alien patients, the diplomats who had mediated countless disputes, the engineers who had maintained infrastructure, the patrol crews who had responded to every distress call no matter how dangerous. Those people had believed in something. Not in the council as it was, but in what it could be. They had given 30 years of their lives trying to build that dream. Could she really let it die without trying one more time? Get me a secure line to the president, Chen ordered. And start running battle simulations. I want to know if there is any possible scenario where we can make a difference. Her tactical officer looked up in surprise. Admiral, you said... I said a lot of things, Chen interrupted. But I am about to propose something very foolish to my government. And I need to know if that foolishness has even a small chance of success. Outside in the darkness of space, the harvesters continued their approach.